session of the Town Board and Planning Commission to order. We are in session March 18th, 2025, a little after 2:30. I think everybody knows everybody, so we aren't going to go around for introductions. We're going to have a slight change on the agenda. We'll be doing the last item first, and then the other two items. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to facilitate the process for us, and I think you all know her.
Yeah. Oh,
Here's one. That's our town attorney.
Because you were on vacation, I think. I hope it was good. Yes. Hi, everyone, and yes, welcome to this first joint study session, where, as mentioned, we will have the three preset agenda items. And to start out, just tell you that my name is Susan Stewart, and I live in Allens Park. I don't live here in Estes Park. And we were invited by Director Caricia, I believe, to facilitate today. Professionally, I've worked as a facilitator for many years, but I volunteer with the Restorative Justice Facilitated Conversations program, so that's how we're here. And Melissa Westover and I are teaming today, but she's going to be recording notes and making sure our flip charts stay up with what you all are discussing today. So we do, I know you all have meeting guidelines for discussion. We have deliberative guidelines as well, so I just put them here. I know that you all will follow these guidelines. They're probably natural for you. Be honest and respectful, listen to understand, be brief so that everyone has a chance to participate. And we're kind of thinking maybe 2 to 3 minutes max on comments. It's okay to disagree, but please do so with curiosity, not hostility. And stay in learning mode. And when we're brainstorming together, don't evaluate or censor yourself or somebody else's brainstormed idea. We're very binary these days in our country, so we'll suggest that instead of that we use yes and or both and type thinking and brainstorming. We have some additional things for guidelines for this particular session. One is, I've been told more than once that these microphones are different than what you're used to in your meetings, and they pick up a lot of side conversations. So we're just going to suggest that you try to limit those, and just remember they're also being recorded. The public is welcome to be here, but in a study session, the public doesn't attend or doesn't participate so that you all can talk to one another at this table. And there's no voting today. If you will need to figure out your ways forward through some sort of consensus process. And I love this idea of scope creep. That's something we're not going to do. We're not going to creep away from the 3 agenda items that we have today. We're going to try to stick with those. And in order to facilitate that, if there are topics that come up in your discussion that you deem to be very important moving forward that should be discussed elsewhere, we have a parking lot up there, and just please make sure those topics get onto the parking lot. Okay, those would be for future study sessions if you deem them to be important. All right. I have a little framing story for you all. Those of us who live over in Allens Park and surrounding communities have a lot of stories about things that happen on Highway 7. but a couple of weeks ago I was driving into Estes, and as I came down from Lily Lake, the road in front of me was very clear, and those beautiful mountains, snow-covered mountains in the distance, were crystal clear with blue sky, but the whole town was covered with fog, dense fog. And it was beautiful, it was glorious, gorgeous. But to me, that's a bit of a metaphor for us today, because to my way of thinking, right now you have we have a comprehensive plan that makes those mountains in the distance pretty clear. But the actual town itself, the actual implementation, is not yet clear. There are a number of processes that need to happen for that to get clear. So before you today, you have some questions to consider about, do you want to do something now in the interim between the new development code rewrite and now to help people move through that fog until the fog can be cleared by the new development code, or not? And so that's some of the work of today's study session. In fact, that's one of the big questions of today's study session for the
Excuse me,
two.
give me a minute.
Hi, welcome. Okay,
Yeah, that is.
I do. I was once a veterinarian also, so so I get it. Okay, so another basic framing for this overall meeting is that the Planning Commission and the staff really want to serve the board and the trustees very well, and they feel like they need greater clarity in that fog, and so we're hoping the items or the outcomes of this meeting that have been expressed to us as hopeful is some action items and next steps to move forward in the 3 agenda areas. Okay. So let's move right into the first agenda item, unless I forgot anything.
I think we
Did I
were
forget
going to
anything?
talk about frequency of meetings first.
Yes. I have that here also. So the 3 agenda items that you all have in front of you. The frequency of future joint meetings, the rezoning criteria, and the workforce attainable affordable housing definitions of the 3. So yes, we will work on the rezoning criteria. We did interview all of the study session all of the town board trustees and the planning commission members. And right up front, want to thank each one of you for the gift of your time to speak with us and help us understand. So the frequency of the future joint meetings, I think Trustee Lancaster, you were the one who recommended this, right?
Right.
Could you give us a framing of what your thinking is on that?
Sure, and I'd hope we've done a couple of these in the past, but very infrequently, the joint meetings. And I think I talked to the planning commission about it, I talked to the town board, is just to have better roll up our sleeves communication other than just throwing recommendations each other ways.
Mhm.
My experience has been with Larimer County, the commissioners and the planning commission meet together like this, sitting around a table just to talk about issues, not items. We can't talk about specific applications, but just issues around that. They do it on a monthly basis. I don't think we need that at all. But I think to be a functioning working group, maybe quarterly is what I would suggest. I think you do it less than that, then we never really come together, gel together as a working single team, the 2 groups together, even semi-annually. And annually, I think is more they'll just say hi, thank, good to see you, and then don't get much done. So my recommendation would be quarterly. The other thing is, we can put it on the agenda, get them scheduled. If we have nothing to talk about, let's cancel the meeting. But at least we had a placeholder there we can be with, and particularly as we're working on the development plan, there's going to be a lot of new little nuances, stuff that probably none of us have thought of. And you're going to get to some point, Steve's going to say, hey, well, wait a minute, what do you want to do about this? And it'd be good for us to be able to do that on a quarterly basis. That would be my suggestion.
Other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think my first meeting on the planning commission was right after a vote that we had approved and brought forward to you guys, to the trustees, that got completely voted down. One of the public members got up in front of the dais and said, you guys need to get your act together. So I think there are going to be times when it's very important for us just to talk through things. And, like you said, I think if we put it on the agenda or the schedule and we don't have anything to talk about, it's easy to cancel. But at least we have the opportunity to get together if we need to. It doesn't need to be very long either. So I agree.
I think we're a little bit at a deficit because we haven't done this. I don't know when the last time this might have occurred, and so having the at least quarterly. I think quarterly is a good place to start. You can always dial up or dial down.
I was going to propose maybe an amendment to the agenda, but I think it's better not to, because I think one of the things we really need to talk about for a future meeting is annexation as well. And that's not on our agenda today, but that's certainly an important thing for the parking lot.
It's running up there to the parking lot.
I'm not proposing to discuss it today.
So can I propose also for the joint meetings that we develop the agenda jointly between the trustees
Absolutely,
and the
yeah.
planning commission?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always envision this as all of us as one group. It's
In
not
collaborative,
us telling you
yeah.
something or you're telling us something. It's the two groups merging and working out common issues.
Any contrary thoughts on that, or does that sound like a reasonable direction to start with?
So it sounds like the action item is to go ahead and get quarterly meetings on the schedule and work together to establish agenda items.
And we'll modify that if we need.
Mayor, from a practical implementation standpoint, some of the questions staff will have is whether you want these in the future to be facilitated and whether you want the roundtable assessment. It does take time to set this up, so we could not do this on a back-to-back day if we had a town board meeting or a planning commission meeting where there was a public hearing scheduled and needed a more formal no voice vote using the system up here. So if there's a desire to have this set up in the future, we'll just want to be conscious of that as we schedule those meetings, because it does take time to affect this, both the setup and the tear down, to reset the room. And then the specific process on agenda creation, we can bring something forward so that both the planning commissioners and the town board have a chance to shape that. I would propose for the town board, we'll bring you just an update during the regular future study session item. And then however the planning commission would like to receive that.
And we'll hold that thought on room arrangement. We have 3 months to figure it out.
Which will come faster than you can imagine.
All right, any further discussion on the first agenda item? Okay, great, success, thank you. So the next agenda item just said rezoning criteria. Which is broad and non-specific. But as we listen to all of you in your interviews, we did hear, so you have a, well, that's interesting, it doesn't have the 3 criteria on this one. In your packets, I hope you have the actual code.
We do.
Okay, right, yeah. Did everybody find that?
Code amendments at the top.
It says page 1 of 2. Yeah, code amendments at the top, 3.3. And if you look down on letter D, about halfway down the page, it says standards for review. And these are the 3 criteria for rezoning. The first one is the amendment is necessary to address changes in conditions in the areas affected. The second one is the development plan, which the proposed amendment to this code would allow, is compatible and consistent with the policies and intent of the comprehensive plan and with the existing growth and development patterns in the Estes Valley. And then the third one is the town, county, or other relevant service providers shall have the ability to provide adequate services and facilities that might be required if the application were approved. Now, in talking with all of you and listening to all of you, it seemed to us that of the 3 criteria, that the one sentence addressing changes in conditions, and we've got some smiling and not head nodding here, seemed to come up as the biggest rub here. In my understanding, it was written to be intentionally vague to allow for flexibility, but we wanted to share with you just a bit of a harvest of what you all said were the things that are confusing this question of, or this one sentence changes in conditions. One of the things that often came up is the change of condition. Where is it happening? What is there an area? Is there a boundary? Is it just the property surrounding that particular property in question? Is it the whole neighborhood? Is it the whole town? Is it the surrounding area, including the county or the state, or up to the whole country? For example, could it include economic changes in economic conditions or housing conditions in a much larger area? So one of the things that came up is, what are the boundaries of this changes in conditions? Another is the time frame, looking at the past or the present or the future. Is it a long-term overview of changes in conditions, or are we talking about recent, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What's the time frame for changes in conditions? Is the comprehensive plan a change in condition? Is the housing study in 22 a change in condition? Is wildlife migration a change in condition? And that study evidently is from the late 90s. Is one change of condition enough? Or should there be multiple changes in conditions? And do they vary in importance? Is there any kind of grading of importance of these things? So these were the things that really came up most commonly. What's missing here? Is there anything that I didn't write up here that should have been?
Well, there is some framing that should probably, because I imagine if we dive into those questions, we'd be missing a certain bigger picture about the review criteria. And I don't want to dive in too far, but I think it's important to note that the criterion about changes in conditions is only there because the town decided that it needs to be in the development code. It doesn't have to be there. It doesn't have to be written that way. That criterion lends itself to lots of different interpretations. And that, I think, more than anything, is what this page lays out. But if we spend this meeting trying to figure out what the right answer is to each of those questions, I think we could spend a lot of time without getting very far. I think the overarching point from my perspective is that we need to ask ourselves, is that criterion doing what we want it to do? If the answer is yes, if we want an open-ended, broad review criterion like that, then we can keep it. Otherwise, if the board and the planning commission want to talk about amending it to address what we actually want it to accomplish, we can do that too. So I'm starting with this because I don't want us to get lost down the rabbit hole.
Thank you very much for that framing. That's very helpful. And again, referring back to the general meeting framing, it's, do you want to do something now? Do you want to wait till the new development code rewrite is finished? That's part of that framing too. Leave it in, take it out, amend it. Right? Thank you very much.
Well, we know in the next 2 years before, or almost 2 years before we have a new development code, we're certainly going to have public hearings for development proposals. I would suggest not waiting, that we do try to come to some agreement on whether to change that wording and eliminate changes in conditions, or define it, or some third direction.
Can you note that down? I mean, is there a short bullet point where you note that down? Is there anything else among those things that have come up for you as you've considered various developments?
The only thing I brought up was, we talked about the housing study, and I don't know how to even word it, was there's change of conditions, but how many availability do we have? What availability do we have of the same subject? So, yes, we have the housing bill. Yes, we need housing. We all know we need a workforce. But if we have, 1,000, I'm just throwing these numbers out. If we have 1,000 available units, is that a change in condition that we don't approve of rezoning for workforce kind of thing?
Okay, so the need for data. And that's going to show up again in the discussion of the workforce attainable, affordable
Right.
discussion.
I want to follow up on something Dan said. As I've thought about this, I don't like the term at all, period. And I don't really like the county's term, change of circumstances, either, because it's too vague and what are you trying to get at? And in my mind, it's more focused, without coming up with anything specific, as to whether the proposed use would be compatible in the neighborhood with existing use. So, for instance,
So that's
Yeah.
that's the surrounding properties and neighborhood.
right. Well, that's part of it,
Yeah.
but it's also change of conditions is too vague, too subject to too many interpretations, and there can't be much certainty with that. And that may be true with compatibility with the neighborhood too, but it just seems like what we're really trying to get to is whether this is an appropriate thing. So, for instance, you don't want to rezone in the middle of a residential neighborhood and put a bowling alley there, but you might want to put a duplex there. Those are different types of things. So as we get into this, I'm going to advocate, and I asked the consultant about this too, to come up with terminology other communities use. And, that's what we're going to have to decide. What is the appropriate terminology? But I think change of conditions has created such problems in trying to apply it for the people on the town board and the planning commission that I personally jettison the whole thing and start all over. and in terms of area too, I certainly think it needs to be the neighborhood, not the whole town. And I didn't agree with I understand why the development department did this, but I didn't agree with the idea that the comprehensive plan would be a change of condition, because it's a separate term already, so you can't double up on a term and make sense out of it. And also, I didn't think really the increased need for workforce housing over time, because that is a community-wide thing, and I just don't think either of those captures the right sense of what we want to achieve when we're, at least in the context of residential rezoning. Commercial rezoning is sort of different. We haven't had the controversy about commercial rezoning that we do with residential. Anyway, that's basically all I wanted to say about it.
Do you have kind of an initial, just gross concept?
Well, I think is compatibility with the uses, other uses in the neighborhood. Something along those lines. That's the only thing I've been able to come up with. A bowling alley wouldn't be, a duplex might be, if it's consistent with the other standards. Because it's not the only standard either. So fitting in with the comprehensive plan is a standard too, which some of these redevelopment plans comply with, some don't.
But
And
Bill,
then
a bowling alley would be more in the criteria number 2, which is, is that appropriate?
It would flunk both.
It fail both. So
Right,
what I'm saying
right.
is, the compatible argument is kind of covered by the second.
I don't think so, because the community went through this whole planning thing, and the beauty of the comprehensive plan is it had great citizen input over a long period of time, and it's the vision of the community as a whole for the future. And so you have in the comprehensive plan, for instance, places that are currently zoned one way, that the vision of the comprehensive plan is that they may grow differently. They may be mixed use rather than all residential. They may be, have some multifamily in it or not. And that's what the comprehensive plan does. It does it in broad strokes. It's not specific enough, I think, to answer the question of whether it's compatible with the uses in the.
And the only thing, Bill, on piggyback, maybe we just reword number 2, because it does say, and with existing growth and development patterns in the Estes Valley. So it's not just a comprehensive plan.
Right.
So maybe just rewording that one, just tweaking that one does what you're saying, and getting rid of the number 1.
I like the compatibility with the neighborhood, and not just the whole. Well, obviously, it has to be compatible with the town, but
Yeah.
it's too broad.
It's
really
too broad to
struggle
do
with
the
that
whole
change in
town.
Conditions.
Yeah.
I mean, I can, in my own mind, I can turn down anything and I can approve anything.
Right.
So that means kind of worthless.
Therein
All
lies
that-
the
So if we
problem.
took number 1 out and reworded
Yeah.
number 2 to include like compatibility with the neighborhood,
Well, I think you're proposing that we change a condition to compatible with the neighbor.
Something along
Either
those
way,
lines,
along
not
that
necessarily that
Number 3,
language
it doesn't have to be
specifically.
that.
I haven't been thinking about this long enough and seeing what other options are
Well, I
available.
mean, with
but-
this, number 2, when it says, and the existing growth and development patterns in the Estes Valley, it makes sense to me to have that with compatibility with the neighborhood. Whether it's that whole sentence and being run on, paragraph, or
I
we
think-
take that into number 1.
On the
Realize
comprehensive plan
the
too.
word- Realize the word compatibility, like changes in conditions.
It's very
You
subjective.
have
We're never going to get a perfect one, first of all.
David,
Yeah, the
or not David.
It's all right.
Sorry.
I've been called worse. My nickname has trouble.
The meeting's not over.
Yeah. There's
No,
plenty
the
of time left.
comprehensive plan, I think that we need to have a way of showing how much work went into that. Meeting 1 had 348 people at 17 tables with, I think it's really important for people that are approaching us to understand, look, why do we look at the comprehensive plan? Because there were that many people at this meeting, there were that many people at this meeting, there was this much input, they filtered this all down, and I think it's really important for us to have that at our fingertips, because you have 12 people in the room that are saying, we don't want this, and hey, there's stuff in the comprehensive plans that I don't like, but
Some things I don't like.
mixed use run across the street from me. Well, okay, but it was an input of all these people, and I would like to stress that every time that we're approached, like because they want to say it's only, what's the word they use? It's not lawful. It's conceptual. So that like it's like, oh,
Aspirational.
aspirational. Thank you.
Aspirational.
So if they say that, it's like, forget it. It doesn't mean anything. No, that's not true. It's people that have put time, me included. I went to every meeting. So I just, that to me is something I want to hang my hat on, saying, I understand what you're saying, but.
But the challenge with the comp plan right now, in my mind, is we don't have zoning that meets what the comp plan says. So there's no zoning requirement for mixed use. So one of the real traps here for us is that when you there's no zoning for mixed use, and the planning department can only take what the zoning that they have.
Yeah.
And now we take mixed multifamily and put it into the mixed use. Now you build a new unit there, it's going to be there for 25 years, and it's not mixed use. So I think the more important thing is even if we go that way and we say, hey, we're going to get rid of one and we're going to rely on the comprehensive plan for that blending, then we can't wait for the development code to come out to rewrite a mixed use zoning. Because we can't keep having people come before us in the mixed use areas and we're cramming some kind of, well, it's sort of like this and it's sort of like that. No, the plan was, and what everybody agreed to, was to a mixed use methodology.
And I think that's
So
why
let's do
that second sentence is in there and compatible with the growth patterns, anticipated growth patterns in the community, something like that.
And I think another
Which is sort of what the comp plan does, but not entirely. Comp plan goes further than that.
Well, right, but if we don't have zoning criteria that meets what the comp plan is saying we're going to do,
How do you apply the
you
comp
can't
plan?
apply. We get conflicted, and the builders are conflicted.
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't know. So now, if we lose a piece of real estate for 25 years that isn't consistent with the comp plan, we're not really doing what we intended to do in the first place.
Well, I think another nice thing for us right now, if the comp plan isn't year 18 of a 20-year plan, you know, it's year 2, right?
That helps.
That really helps. I mean, I think that maybe year 10 you could get, but right now, you know, this is current. This is what people said. This is what we all wanted. We all put our input in.
There was
Still
an agreement to
aspirational.
update it periodically and not wait for 25 years.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But right now we have a plan that's relatively fresh.
You know, some of it, because I've been around so long, goes back to when we rezoned everything, when the county and the town merged together, and we did that rezoning. And it was not possible to rezone every single parcel. I mean, we would have taken years to look at everyone individually. So a lot of it was just whatever was there at the time, that's what the zoning was made. Whether it made sense with a comp plan or with the area or not, and it never was meant to be chiseled in stone. It would have been nice to go through and take the new joint comprehensive plan and compare every parcel, but that wasn't what it was done. So we do have some parcels that probably are zoned improperly now, and we need to accept that fixing those, and that wasn't, you know, sent down from the mount on a stone, what the zoning is. Even without changes in conditions, some of them probably aren't the right zone.
I want to take it back to Susan for a second.
Thank you. That was so most kind of you.
That's
So
my purpose in life.
To be
be
kind.
kind. I like that. So we want to focus on the question about changes in condition because it was the agenda item or the rezoning criteria. And it's good. I'm hearing a mixture of comments about this and in general, and a mixture of positive potential brainstorming action items. And so we thought it would be most useful, since you can't actually hammer out new definitions in this study session. There's just not time for that. To ask you all, what would be the sort of next steps or positive action items you might want to take going forward from this study session that would lead you to what you're talking about? And I wanted to also remind you, this is probably all very top of the mind for all of you, but as I was listening to you talking in the interviews, I sort of started thinking about, well, there's a lot of competing values going on in this question of the rezoning criteria. And all the values are good values, but they're in competition with each other. So necessarily there's going to need to be some discussion, negotiation, decision making, because it's not black and white. And even in the competing values, there's do we follow public policy, or do we follow what the perceived public desire is? And on property rights, you know, I have a right to build on my property, but I also have a right to enjoy my property as it is. And at the community level, you know, should we preserve the characteristics of the town, whatever that means? That's a value. And then there's the value of the community need for housing and services, homes near transportation and walking to school, the community vision in the comprehensive plan, and nice places for all to live and work in town. So these are competing values. that are implicit in this question of the rezoning criteria. So what would be, rather than just continuing to talk about it, what might be your next steps or your action items moving forward?
Well, one thing I think we need to decide, I'm hearing us here, but do we just wait and let the development code fix this? Or do we do it now? Personally, I don't think we could wait 2 years, because we're just gonna stay in this limbo, we're all gonna be frustrated.
Right.
So, that's the first one, if we could agree, we need to address this before the development plan is done and incorporate that into the development plan.
I already pre-agreed to that.
I agree to that too.
Okay,
I agree.
but I think we just need to put that on
Yeah,
the
you
table.
agree to it.
That we're not, this is something we need to address.
Yeah, we can't.
Yes,
Is
absolutely.
there anybody against that? Everyone voice
Right.
of reason. Okay.
But I think it's certainly, somebody made this suggestion about looking at other terminology that other cities do. That would be one of the things that there could be a little bit of research done into. Typically, if we come out of a study session with a consensus of direction of next actions, it usually falls to town staff to try to get a little closer to crystallization of the idea or statement, and then we have another discussion and figure out how that needs to be tuned up. That tends to be a common process. I think that's the general.
Travis just needs to read 7 minds and meld them together.
You guys are pretty good.
10
Quite
marks.
good at it.
Yeah,
Can
just-
I
Planning
ask
commission
well,
too.
then too, yeah.
Or is yours recommendation for research specifically around changes in conditions, or is it around all the rezoning criteria? All three
It's finding a general statement that replaces that.
that replaces changes in conditions?
So what's
Which
tough,
may be the second item on there.
well, what's tough, Gary, is I did that. So one of the things I did before this meeting was I went out and looked at Breckenridge, I looked at Denver, Boulder, Loveland, all their, and what are their rezoning requirements, to see if you could find some commonality between them where, and the change in conditions doesn't exist in many of them. And so I don't know that you're going to find some common language like that. But I also, when I looked at those towns, I started thinking about them. Those towns aren't like our town, right? So we don't necessarily need to be exactly like any other community or municipality. But that change in conditions piece, in many of their codes, doesn't exist for reason.
Right.
So it's more along the comprehensive plan. It's more along criteria 2 than it is any other.
It might be better growing organically here,
So-
what we wanted.
I have a view of that change of conditions, I think was put in, so you can't just willy-nilly change rezoning. So rezoning should be hard, but it shouldn't be impossible either. And change of conditions to me suggests that whoever advocated for that wanted some level of greater permanency than was perceived without it in the zoning. And I think the question will come down to our balance of permanency for assurance for the homeowners, and yet the necessity for change over time. And that's the real balance that has to be struck somehow. So, but you're right, it's not present everywhere, and I do think we need something more than the last 2, though.
Can you make a recommendation of an action item? Not what you need, but what needs to be
I
done.
think the
after
research, and don't wait, come back with some research on some alternatives. And even those that use change of conditions, how they apply them, if we can figure that out.
So the question is who? Are we gonna, is that, we get a staff action?
Let
Dan,
me
did
take
you
a
have
shot at
something?
this. Let me take a
Yeah.
shot at this. So I don't know how change of conditions became an independent review criterion in our development code. I don't know that history. But it also didn't come out of nowhere. As best I can tell, it's based on Colorado case law from the 70s and 80s that said, if you want to rezone, it better be consistent with your comprehensive plan. And if it's not consistent with your comprehensive plan, then there better have been a change of conditions.
So it's alternative, not 2 separate requirements.
It doesn't have to be in our code, but I think that's where it came from.
Okay.
So
It
And I
became
know,
it became bifurcated in our conditions as opposed to being
One or the
part
other.
of the criteria.
Either
of two.
or.
that's right. So, and I know that
That's a
Steve
good
has already done some work on this and dug up some potential language. In fact, it's been a template from DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs, for some time, that does it that way, that reunites those two concepts. And I honestly, I don't think that a ton of research is required, because I don't know, as Commissioner Arterburn said, I don't know that there's a whole lot of light to be shed from seeing what all these different communities have done. But I think that taking maybe that DOLA example and seeing if that's what fits for our community, if there's something else, that might be a place to start. We can do further research. I just don't know how helpful that's going to be.
You know, I think that's getting in the weeds for us. I think really, if staff has to feel where we're concerned about this is not working, and we direct the two boards, say, staff, will you come back with some drafted language that addresses our concerns? That's probably our role as a governing bodies to do that.
Trustees, commissioners, if I could just interject, just to follow up on the town attorney.
I just want to make sure I capture that item here. So he suggested that staff come up with.
Yeah, I think that's the right route. I think Frank's
They know
got it
where
right.
we want to go.
Yeah.
Staff come up with some suggested modifications to the current criteria. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Steve?
I think, thank you, Mayor, I think through town administrator, I think I am hearing a direction. I guess I would just like to say that we've started research, but I don't want to say that this is going to be easy, because we would have to look at all three criteria, and we would like to bring you something comprehensive. We just can't change one. We have to look at all three. And then also, I believe you would also want us to go through a significant public process to vet these ideas that the board and the commission would like. So we're still looking at a multi-month process, maybe something sooner than 18 to 24, but it's not by May, June. This will take much longer. So I just wanted to put that out there. It would take staff time. It would take a public community engagement process, the public hearings through both bodies.
I think to narrow it, the other thing we can do, does anybody have any problem with the third criteria, that there has to be adequate facilities?
No.
Okay, so I think that one is,
Leave it alone.
leave that alone.
Leave that alone for sure.
Don't spend any time on that. That, to me, that's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer, but that comes up all the time.
It does.
Yes,
Every time we get one of these requests, it's going to be there's traffic. It's
it's an important criteria.
an important criteria, but I mean, even though that we've gone through the process of vetting that, and the appropriate agencies have, have gone through their due diligence, it still comes up to say, well, there's not enough access to the firefighters or whatever.
Right, but in terms of what we're talking here, in terms
But
of
anyway,
code
I
change,
think it's
that we really only need
one or two.
one and two to be addressed in
Yeah.
terms of a code change
That
to
was my point.
reduce. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not really sure two needs to be changed, but maybe.
Well, it's not a matter of whether two needs to be changed, but whether you're blending one and two together.
Right. No, I get that. I don't want to blend one and two together. I
The
think
more we
need
narrow
it.
the focus for staff, the less time we'll take to do it.
Okay, good.
But is staff going to provide alternatives or just one solution?
Trustees, commissioners, I would like to provide you a menu that you could pick from,
Yeah.
some
That's
suggestions,
what
some
I would
recommendations.
I agree.
Something we can vote on and get the consensus on would be better.
Great. Are there any other potential action items or next steps around this agenda, the second agenda item of the rezoning criteria?
Can I
So-
just clarify, just before we go forward, to make sure I captured everything here?
Well, wait a second, attorney.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see
No,
it.
it's okay.
It's all right.
I'm just trying to think ahead. I don't know if we're coming to the town board for a study session first, or the planning commission for a study session first on this, or if there's a preference.
I'd like to see us do it jointly. And if we have to have an extra joint session,
Yeah.
then when that comes forward, we have a joint session, because I think this has been very helpful.
We all see different perspectives of this from the
We
planning
do.
commission.
Yeah.
And I think to have all of us talking about it together there's a real advantage.
And what kind of time frame were you really looking at? I mean, I get it takes time. Can you give us any idea really about what time to bring it? Not talking about the whole process to get it changed, because we talked about hearings and everything else. But at what time, at what point we're looking at coming back to us with choices?
Well, I think some parameters we could discuss here today. I mean, like Town Attorney said, we've started, but it is complex. There are several different ways that you could package this, and we could provide you a recommendation. So it will be some research for us to look at all the various different
30
municipalities.
days? 30 days? Is that enough time?
I would say a little longer.
60,
Just because we also have, as Trustee Brown said, annexations that we want to bring back for you, which is another complex topic. The other parameter I think I would like to see for.
So before you go on, so is annexations and the rezoning, are they in the same or two separate topics?
They're two separate topics.
So
really.
I'm saying only,
Yeah.
let's do this zoning, the zoning criteria is separate from annexation.
I think what he's saying is we have some
Staff
annexation,
workload
some
is
workload that's in
with
process.
annexation, yeah.
I got it.
So it's going to take some time
Do you
out.
think the target of the first board meeting in May possibly, and might be a time to see such a litany?
Mayor, I guess the other parameter I would like to, direction I'd like to receive is what type of public engagement would you like to see? Would you like to see, we would normally require, of a private developer, a neighborhood meeting. Would you like to have an open house for the public? Would you like to have several? How would,
But would we do that after we had a few proposed
Yeah, I think,
replacements?
Something to put out
I
there.
think we need to filter it a little bit before.
okay.
Because it becomes
That's the
another
way I would look
comprehensive
at it.
plan conversation. Honestly.
Otherwise, it'll be too freeform, I think. But
So I'm hearing a hopeful sense of by the May board meeting have
One of the meetings in May
one of the
was,
meetings in May have some possible suggestions and recommendations.
Well, but I thought we were gonna bring it back to the
I
joint
think we have a
session,
separate
so-
meeting.
Oh, okay.
So I would say by the 1st of May, we bring it back to the joint session, not to the board. And then we collectively discuss it here, and then
I
when we
think that
get
makes
down to
sense.
the kind of where we think it's gonna be in a much tighter sense, then we can start the rest of the engagements.
whether that's public hearings or public comment in board meetings or whatever shape it takes, we can shape that at that time.
And I would say, given the challenges of getting this group together, and as you see, we weren't even successful in getting everybody together. If we can have some flexibility on scheduling the joint meeting when it's ready within like a 60-day plus or minus time frame, that would allow us to make sure that we're managing staff workload and finding a date that works for as many town board members and planning commissioners as we can get here.
Susan, I don't want to sound like disenchanted and or throwing a wrench in, but I do wonder if we're going to come across the same challenge of open to interpretation, nebulous application, especially when it comes to, like, if we're moving past what I think is a really good conversation about values differences and into like kind of the operational application of these. And so I wonder if it might be helpful as part of this, not something that I think we could even get into or solve now, but maybe part of our next conversation is some sort of consolidation or I don't know, compromise about our values differences here, what we might represent as different segments of the community and how those would influence what this kind of shakes out as. Because in this, I feel so similarly to Dick about the comp plan. Like I hang my hat on that quite a bit. I brought it up several times. I really find a lot of value in it. And I also see that there's differences in interpretation or, how the comp plan actually like comes into action. And so I just envision that something similar when we meet next time. It would be helpful, I think, if this group could have, as representatives of our different demographics, a conversation about our values differences, because I think that foundational layer is going to make such a big difference in us coming to terms with the actual like way we execute whatever Steve and his team bring forward. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just, otherwise it feels like we're skipping beyond that foundational level and just going to like the plywood, right, versus the concrete, you know?
You gotta have the concrete first.
Yeah, so
Strategic plan discussion, this is a very good point of last week in the initial session. I recall one of the strategic items in column 1 there as making, in effect, a value statement of balancing the need for development with
Right.
the preservation of the character of Estes Park. I don't remember the exact terminology, but along those lines, which kind of is a single statement, but I certainly wouldn't deny that we could have that discussion.
I think, well, and I don't like, not to sound too woo-woo or anything, but maybe that's some pre-work this group could do before we come to the table for our next meeting is, I don't know if this is something that could be shared or that maybe we could charge you with doing to give us some work to, everyone could come to the table and talk about some of those values differences and how we can build consensus that will help us select from the menu and make it so that later staff isn't bringing something to us that we ultimately have a fundamental challenge with, right? Because that's what it keeps coming back to is like underneath when we have to make these interpretations publicly, everybody's got a different way of applying it. It's still nebulous because of our values differences. So that's, I don't know, that just keeps crossing my mind as something we might want to consider as part of our discussion.
And Melissa wrote it up as, how do values differences influence,
Coming to terms with how the plan is executed.
and Kirby, you mentioned maybe gaining some consensus about the values differences. Interestingly, when we interviewed all of you, it was crystal clear that you were all coming from a different place, and there's a lot of beautiful diversity in how you view these issues. So whatever it is, keeping that perhaps as a starting point for the next discussion, in which then you lay on the table values differences, and then you talk about options.
When we talk about neighborhood compatibility, it really is a values discussion.
That's exactly when I
Right.
started to
Very
write
much.
that down.
Because when we
'Cause
start
I'm like-
doing it about that, that's,
Totally open to interpretation.
it is, and it's up
Yeah.
to the values.
Especially if you live in that
I think
neighborhood.
we
you're gonna
can't
have a
forget
different
though that
opinion.
that's one of the reasons we're a board of 7 and they're a board of 3, that we have those diverse. If
Right.
we all had the exact same one, we could just have the mayor and we could just go home,
We just have a checklist.
or just have me and y'all could go home. That would be great. But the point is, I agree with you, but we have to remember that diversity is good because that's why we have a board of 7, and that's why we have votes all the time, because your vote of 1 out of 7 or your vote of 1 out of 3 is going to be 1/3 of the community. My vote of 1 out of 7 is going to be 1/7 of the community.
I totally agree with that. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying we all need to be 100% on the same page, but I do think when we're talking about this joint group and trying to have a good coaching for staff, good understanding for the community of what comes as an approval from the planning commission and then comes to the town board and we have our collective vote is completely 180 different, right? That's where I think some of that like values conversation is
I
important.
think it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we all
I just
agree
would-
at the end of the
you have to
day,
be careful
but-
not to be.
And just from a realistic staff is not going to be able to bring you a code amendment that does not require interpretation. And frankly, with every item that comes forward, that conflict and that discussion about values, because we're sitting here today and in May of 2026, we're going to have new members of the board. So those values will shift over time, and I think they've shifted over at least the 10 years I've been here. So I think that conversation is going to happen. There is going to be, unless we get really narrow in what is allowed for rezoning, and I mean very technical about it. Zoning is a reflection of the community's values, and it's a snapshot in time of what that community is valuing at that moment. Same with the comp plan.
And I'm not hearing anybody saying we want to tighten this down so much that you met these 5 check things and you will get rezoned. I don't think zoning can be done that.
I don't think it can either.
But
There's too many nuances.
can I just note that I love this conversation because what it's flagging for me is that values come into this specific question of the rezoning criteria in 3 different ways. Because first of all, the criteria themselves are a reflection of our values and the balance that we're trying to strike. And then individually, our values in how we're weighing the factors of the review criteria come into play. And thirdly, what Kirby is emphasizing, I think, is that we also all need to talk about that as a group, even though it's going to come down to our individual judgments, that all 3 of them, I think, are true.
Thanks, Dan. You could just follow me around and summarize what I'm trying to say. Thanks.
He doesn't get shoulder.
That's one of
There's gonna
those
be a
kind
fee
of
for that.
statements that rounds things out that facilitators love. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that we ought to ask Melissa to review the possible action items, and then we can move on to your 3rd topic. Are you ready? Okay.
So can I just do
yes,
one last,
please.
so that I don't know whether it's parking lot or whatever, but in amongst this, we still need to decide on getting zoning, if we're going to even have the comprehensive plan's going to continue to be called out in these zoning criteria, we need to have zoning compatible with that comp plan. So where we have gaps, that needs to get fixed at the same time. So it's not just writing fixing those first 2 zoning criteria. The mixed use needs a zoning criteria. Otherwise, we're gonna carve out real estate in zoning that's not meant for that area. We're gonna lose it for 25 years.
So we have that up there. Let's just check and make sure. Melissa, you want to go ahead and tell us all the
Right, so these are just things that I heard as we were initially talking about it. Does change of conditions terminology need to be there at all? Is it too vague? Should it be amended? And part of this discussion then led back to this, we agree that we need to address it sooner as opposed to waiting for 2 years. Did I hear consensus on that?
Yes.
Okay, so we can say that. Okay, and what to do with new proposals that come before the rewrite, I guess would be taken care of as you have done amendments or whatever it is you're gonna do to help staff know what to bring before you. So let's see, what do other communities use for terminology?
So on that, finding statements and places of change of conditions, thought we had agreed that staff is going to work that we're not going to go out and research that. They have some ideas already.
But that's an action item.
That's action for them. Okay.
Yeah, that's an action item, but I'm not quite done yet. So.
Okay.
I'm trying to meld these 2 together so that they make sense.
Okay, got it.
So that's part of the terminology and what other people are doing and the DOLA verbiage. So this is an action item for staff to try and kind of get an understanding of what other people are doing. And
I don't know. I think the staff was bringing forward. So I didn't hear consensus on research of other communities.
okay,
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I was trying to say. Is we tabled that,
okay.
and
so
so
I'm
they're
not
going to
doing
come
that. Thank
forward
you.
with language that
That's why we go over these
is
things.
consistent
right?
with DOLA or whatever you guys come up with to merge 1 and 2.
Okay.
Or look at what.
I don't think we're telling him not to go look at stuff.
No, but I don't think
It's
it's.
not
No, but it's
Yeah.
not it's not a
That's not
research
a-
project to come back and here's the list of what everybody else did.
No plagiarizing.
Here's Mud Steve.
Well, if you-
Doing great.
I just went to Chat GTP and it gives you state by state what they're saying in their codes about change of condition.
But it could be totally wrong.
I mean, that's something. To
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think
You're
I don't think
going
we want
AI
New York
now.
City change of
Well,
conditions.
no, they give you
Gives you an
what
idea.
cities.
What you're
Yeah,
saying is easily
Yeah,
accessible.
we're-
yeah, it's easy accessible. You can at least get an
Little
idea.
rowdy here,
One
folks.
conversation at a time.
Yeah, one at a time.
Okay, Melissa.
So the big takeaway I think that I heard anyway was that Steve and his team are going to come back with a menu of items for this group to first look at and maybe do some tweaking, some conversation around that before it actually goes to the public or town board or whatever you all try to do. And that would be, what I did not hear was exactly when that was going to happen or when you want that to
No
happen.
later than 60 days. is it?
Plus or minus 60 days, depending on staff workload and ability to get this group together.
Okay, so we'll say plus or minus 60 days.
That's what former
Appropriately
trustee
gray.
McAlpine would call weasel words.
I decided for the minus 60 days part.
Okay, so here's the menu of items right here. This is the one. And then jointly, you'll decide what to do with them after that, right? Now, there's also this question around values, and I don't know exactly what you want to do with that.
Well, you put that up into the parking lot for the next meeting.
Right.
next
So
I
I
mean,
think that's
is
appropriate.
that, but my question is that an action item for the next meeting?
That was what the suggestion was.
Yes,
Okay,
I
all
think
right.
so.
So basically, I'm hearing three. Well, one is just the general decision that we are going to address this topic. The second is around this whole menu of items to consider. Yes, sir.
So, in terms of the values discussion, I really like that discussion, by the way. But in many respects, if you all haven't developed a value statement for your strategic vision yet, shouldn't that be the guiding? Shouldn't what you guys come up with the value statement for the town and what we're trying to accomplish be that guiding light? Or I'm not sure where I understand where the value
What I heard
discussion.
the suggestion to be was that you all share what your grounding values are around rezoning as part of the discussion.
Yeah, I don't see it as a value statement. There's a number of values that come into play when you do rezoning from other parties and people values. Some are core values, some are more peripheral values, and just talking about what are those values that we need to consider when we're doing it. I mean, the town does as a mission and vision statement, and that's pretty set.
Is the product of that values conversation the rezoning criteria? Or is there a different product that this group is envisioning for the values, the outcome of the values discussion?
See, that's what I don't understand is so I come and say, these are the values I looked at this under, and then so what do we do? What do we do with that? I mean, because in each one of us is going to bring a different perspective. So now we lay 100 values on the table, and then how do we use that as a deciphering tool?
Can I throw something out?
Yeah,
Yeah. So, what I would see if we did that and we had this values map up there, then we can say, all right, these are all the values that we have to address when we do a rezoning. Does the criteria we're proposing work for balancing those values?
So should we have that meeting, that values discussion before Steve brings his thing, and
think
not
it'd be
wait
done
till we
together.
get it done? Well, but if we wait, I don't think we need to wait 60 days to go say what we all value in terms of rezoning, et cetera. So if we can get that nailed down and get that kind of stabilized about what we're going to apply, then potentially we have some criteria that we could use when Steve does get done.
I agree with David. I mean, it's not even fair for us to ask Steve to rewrite this without knowing what our values are.
So how do you see that happening?
That's not my job.
Well, are we talking about our values as the 10 people here? Or are we talking about community values that have to be addressed or that flow into a rezoning? I was thinking more of the latter,
Me too.
not
You've
just
got
us.
a bunch of them listed up there.
Right. And there's probably a whole bunch more. And not all values are equal. Some are more core values and some are farther out in the spectrum.
Right, so we lay those values, we take that, we put a chart up there, and then do we now prioritize them? Do we?
I don't think we can prioritize someone else's values. I think we can put in there though is we need to be able to.
Be aware that those are the values that.
Those are the
are
values
shared
that
by
we
all.
need to be able to. That this has to address. Does that make sense?
So not to decrease or minimize the need for another meeting, if we have a list of our values here, that
This
we
is
worked out.
just
That's a very
a
limited.
very just Susan sitting
Got it.
there after listening to all of you. That's all.
Got it. Got it.
Disclaimer received.
Yes, got it. But I wonder, I mean, if people have like different ones, and I'm not talking about, such minute things but the big ideas that are different from this. I just wonder if we as a group could compile those and not make a list of 100 different values when you talk about zoning, but keep broad like this and figure out what we have to add and not spend 3 hours talking about values because we could. I mean, the mission statement takes 5 hours to do. So, if we could maybe see what's here now and see if we have any other ideas that are not related to these, we actually make a list instead of making a 3-hour meeting and us talk about our feelings.
Does the comprehensive plan, would you say that was designed by people's values? I mean, doesn't that
Yes.
bring values?
Yes, but I
Maybe
think
we
it's all
could use the
putting it in a
comprehensive
list.
plan, because again, now we're looking at the values of the community. They decided over time that this was important, so that's something they value.
Right. And that is that. This is just compiling a list of it. But
And I was saying
agree
maybe we
with you.
could focus on this comprehensive plan that already has a lot of input from community members, and say, well, what were the values that they are floating out of the comprehensive plan?
Yeah, fair statement. I mean, the values are kind of the landscape against which we paint the foreground. I don't see a reason to hold up the process, though. We've already got like a preliminary list. We've got the comprehensive plan. Those are things that are part of the whole landscape of what we have to consider when you're making decisions, when we're making decisions. But I would still proceed with coming up with the alternative statements.
So were there values that were documented as part of the comprehensive plan, that the values that were used to create it, or would we be re-legislating the comprehensive plan?
No,
The decisions that were made
Yeah, I
will
think
show the values.
I think that, like, especially after listening to everyone talk, that it's not about identifying our individual or even collective community values. It's having consensus about if whatever criteria we define collectively, if it matches against what our community has defined as important values in the comprehensive plan, and if we can agree on that interpretation together, again, foundationally, versus go straight to the criteria and not have that, like, that, underlying conversation, because otherwise what I'm concerned about is then we would get to the point where it's all like, well, my interpretation of the comp plan is this, and your interpretation of the comp plan is this. So I think now I'm like, do I regret bringing up values? 'Cause it's become like everyone drink every time someone says values. But I think it's an agreement, that consensus about, okay, what is our community defined as valuable as part of this comp plan, and can we measure this, kind of what Frank was saying, can we measure the criteria against that in not an arbitrary way, but in a less open to interpretation way, less nebulous
kind
way.
of a litmus test thing. You could take some, the big one of these, it's always this thing, is the balance of private property rights with community property rights. And
But
we
that's
talk
not
about,
comp plan.
those are both big, huge core values. If we take those and then we look at whatever criteria they come up with, we say, is this criteria going to help us balance these two? If we say yes, then we're probably on the right track. If we said no, it's not going to help us at all, then we're probably on the wrong track. So looking at comparing what we come up with to even some of those key core values could help be a test for whether what we're getting for is going in the right direction.
Well, and I might have missed it in there, but I don't remember anywhere in the comp plan that talks about private property rights versus exactly what you just said. I don't see it in the comp plan.
And that's the classic battle with land use.
I know. So I don't think we can go just by the comp plan. Values, drink.
I'll be so hydrated.
But I do think we have those values in mind, or we put them on a list, or whatever. I don't see anything much that's not on this list. It's in the comp plan, unless I've missed something. That's what I'm trying to say. Is we could talk about it for years, but we went through the whole comp plan. We know what's in there, or we should know what's in there. And if there's anything missing in this list, maybe we put it on the list. But I don't think going just by the comp plan is possible, because that doesn't address private property rights. It doesn't.
So
Well, that's where we
if
talk about compatibility with the neighborhood, broadens it out a little bit.
So if we go back to what Travis said about it's a snapshot in time, right? Both for the community and for individuals. What are the values the community's holding? So you have, what I've heard on one side is this desire for some kind of decision-making tool or aid. And on the other side, something that's a little bit more loosely held, an awareness now that these are the values our community holds as expressed through the comp plan, and what we've heard through the other discussions about rezoning, and having that available then to use to to remind yourselves before you make decisions about the new rezoning criteria. Is that,
So I'm
Is that
looking
what
at the
you're
comp
thinking
plan right now, and there's guiding principles, and there's 2 pages of guiding principles.
right?
Those are the values
It is
by which the
values,
comp plan was done. And I think if we say, okay, let's look at the criteria come up inconsistent with those guiding principles in the comp plan, then the value discussion is kind of could table potentially the whole value discussion. And then again, I like your idea, Frank, of saying, okay, now just take it from this larger community level to could we apply those same principles to each neighborhood as we go through this? Then that would really narrow the whole values discussion and get it. So I'd encourage everybody to pull the comprehensive plan and revisit those before we do that. And then if there's discussion along that,
Good
then
action item.
we use that as a framework.
And that's
Yeah,
kind of
that's
what I'm saying.
excellent.
Is there something different here that's in there? But without knowing those, you can't say that.
Yeah, and it's a pretty good list. There's one guiding principle page that's got like almost 20 guiding principles, which are the values that the campground was developed.
Good suggestion. And Kirby, that meets what you originally suggested.
Sure.
And
I think it heads us in the right direction.
Yeah, it helps us not to lean too much on what we value, as opposed to here's the
Exactly.
community value. It may not, I might not
Correct.
agree with that community value, but this is what.
That's exactly, and that's exactly right, because I think when we were talking about that with the comp plan, there's stuff in the comp plan that maybe I don't personally agree with, but the community collective, right?
Right.
Like that's what we're here to represent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, and not to take this too deep, but the collective will of the community is vested in the election of town board members.
Yeah.
So we come back around to the action and interpretation that you all have to make of it. Face it, it will be ambiguous at certain times, and you will have to balance values. The community has elected town board members, and town board members have appointed planning commission members to represent and balance those values as you interpret the code.
Yeah, and back to Melissa.
So could we encapsulate all that by saying that everyone agrees that they will review the comprehensive
Yes,
plan value
everyone
system?
agrees that they will review that, yes.
Before
There's a sign by the mayor.
Steve brings forth his proposal, is that a fair statement that you all can agree on to review that?
Yes.
He doesn't have to wait.
They all agree, Melissa.
Okay,
And that's,
yeah, and he doesn't have to wait for another discussion.
Correct.
He can get right to work just like you want.
and that's the end of the action items.
That's the end of the action.
Thank you very much.
So the reason I did that is
20
because we have about 40 minutes.
I know. And so the meeting is finished at 4:30 according to the announcement. And so,
Before we move, I am concerned that Commissioner Arterburden's concern regarding the gap between zoning district and rezoning
yeah,
criteria
and did that get up?
has not been
It
captured.
didn't get up there,
I'm
Melissa.
sorry,
That's
what?
right. Thank
What was
you
that?
for reminding me.
Oh,
Because
the
comp
need
plan.
for zoning definition.
Right, I think I did
multi-use.
have that over
Is,
here.
is
No,
it
but
alright
can-
if I suggest
you
that
put
as
that
a
in the parking lot?
item?
Can
Yeah.
you put it in the parking
The
lot?
current gap.
Okay. Currently, thank you. Thanks for your help.
Dave, was that
The multi-use.
the multi-use that there's a gap?
No, there are others.
I think there are others,
There
but
are-
that's the
there
one
may-
that's
that comes
coming
to
up
mind.
most
Now,
predominantly.
The comp plan always identifies current zoning that kind of relates to it, so, but it doesn't convert it from one to another.
Right, so the mixed use is the most dramatic
Yeah,
in that
yes.
it really defines something completely different. And there's no zoning that matches that. It's a mixture of commercial and multifamily, so
So it's
you
different,
can,
Melissa. It's specifically
mixed
to
use.
define mixed use
Mixed
zoning.
use, but potentially others.
Yeah.
There are others too, but, that's the
I
worst
can
one.
at least
yeah.
one other,
That'll be a
but I know
future
it's gonna
parking
come
lot.
up here in just a minute. So, mixed use as an example.
Zoning.
And I'm okay with putting it in the parking lot for now because we won't talking about way more for today, but it needs to be on staff's list of actions to go forward. Because I don't think we want to wait
Yeah,
for the new
Don't
development.
put it in an underground parking lot.
It's a
Yeah.
short-term parking.
It's short term.
Isn't it a parking garage?
Paid parking or
Trigger
not
warning
paid
mark.
parking?
I don't want to sit in any more reviews.
All
We're
right,
talking-
good. Normally I'd say, let's take a break, but we don't have
We don't
enough
have
time. Is
time.
that all right with you all?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Let's move on to our third point, which the agenda item was workforce, affordable, and attainable housing definitions. And I asked that the actual code for, which is actually for workforce and attainable, be included in your packet. I also asked, just for your own reference, that the Larimer County AMI be included in your packet, just so you could see what it's talking about in the code when it talks about attainable. Once again, we looked at what you all said, and I want to highlight those questions. There's some key questions that came out that I think will help your discussion. But there are some basic facts that are true facts, that the existing development code defines workforce and attainable housing in order to get a housing density bonus. There is no definition for affordable housing in your current code, and I think that's an important point, because we heard people using attainable, affordable interchangeably sometimes in interviews, so we really need to be clear about that. The code currently says absolutely nothing about affordable housing. And then that the definition of attainable housing uses the Larimer County average median income, which is in that chart that you have. And one thing to consider too is that the AMI, the 150% of the AMI may actually be well above your target if you're thinking about affordable housing. So it's probably well above what a middle-level worker earns in Estes Park, and also way above an hourly wage earner's income. So those are just facts and data consideration for this discussion on definitions. So here were the questions that came up when we heard from you all. And again, thank you very much for your thoughtful and giving of your time for this information. So one of the things I just mentioned is that affordable is not in the code, but people assume that some people assume workforce is affordable. And that there is a difference between, people said that there might be a difference between the actual code and what the public perception of what should be, how that increased density should be used, and the public desire. So there's a question of, if affordable is not in the code currently, should it be? So another question is, in the rezoning, should some units be affordable? And what does that mean? Then several people talked about a challenge to, when they're making decisions about developments, what are the current metrics for the whole community? By income level, about availability of housing, by income levels, what's for sale and rent, and the occupancy rate of rental units. So data came up from a number of you when you were talking. And is the desired intent of the workforce amendment to the code or is the intent, the desired intent of this amendment, the workforce amendment, having the desired impact in the community? And several people brought up, are we currently leveraging the 6E funds appropriately? So these were some of the key questions and issues that came up. I want to remind you that one of the questions on this is, do you need to work on clarifying the fog now, or is this a question for the development code rewrite process? Or are these questions for the development code rewrite process? So in your discussion, you may want to think about that. Are any of these? Do any of these need clarifying for anyone?
Well, so I want to clarify one of my statements that's sort of there, but question I asked was, we give a 200% density bonus to workforce, what is the definition of workforce housing, which could be up to $2 million, $3 million homes. And we give 200% density bonuses for ones that are in attainable housing, which is AMI less than 150%, which still doesn't necessarily service a large portion of our community that need workforce. What people deem in their minds and hear workforce housing, they don't think of somebody owning a $2 million home or being a lawyer that's got an LLC in town that actually is working for oil dealers in Houston, right? So the point being is there's not clarity what these density bonuses in each one of these categories is doing for us in terms of our housing market. And what are we trying to get for at giving developers these density bonuses? What do we hope to accomplish? An example is in the conversation with Scott Moulton today was he needs 2,700 units by 2030. He's already got 300 in work. That leaves 2,400 units. Well, guess what? That's 300 acres of land we need to find at 8 units per acre in accordance with the development code. Well, I think we need to rethink how we're incentivizing builders to build on the land that we do have available. What's the right sizing? What's the right pieces of that? Not just give density bonuses in these two categories, because it can be developers see those and say, hey, I can make my equity go a lot farther if I get this density bonus. So that is without consideration to the rest of the community, where we're just piling things super sky high. You know, we're building on acreage that, you know, is right next to stuff we haven't rezoned yet, you know, to putting other people, disenfranchising other people. So my comment was, I think collectively we need to rethink how we're approaching housing and where we're giving incentives in the development code.
So can we
put
put that on the parking lot, Melissa? Because that is unfortunately it's very valid, but unfortunately it is agenda item creep. Because the agenda item says definitions of workforce attainable affordable. It's a very important point.
Yep.
And if we follow it, so please make sure that she's getting it up there the way you want it.
What I heard you saying, Dave, was to offer choices, maybe something beyond a different scope, perhaps?
When we do the development code, we need to revisit how we're incentivizing density bonuses to achieve our housing goals.
I wanted to ask, and maybe Scott is the one I want to ask this, is it, how are the ADUs? I mean, the town opened up a whole opportunity to put ADUs. How is that reflected in our housing? Is that in that
So we don't
going in
have
the
public,
parking lot?
we don't have public comment in this meeting, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
But that's a valid question.
Another good parking.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked to Scott about addressing some of those questions.
But I mean, I was just wondering if
I'm sure Jason too can weigh in on some of that.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to weigh in while Commissioner Ardenberg's maybe parking lotted for now, there is a component of that I think it does behoove this group to answer, and that's what's the definition of workforce. Do we want to codify it, or are we okay with it being appropriately vague? Right now it says you're employed within the school district boundaries. What's unclear is, can you be self-employed? Can you work 2 hours a month doing an appointment for somebody as a hairdresser, or helping somebody with their taxes? Can you live here and be employed? Work remotely using our excellent internet for the Silicon Valley, things like that,
And get the benefit of workforce housing.
Yeah, and when we do, the question has come up. Trustee Brown brought this up recently. The question comes up. Well, we talk about the requirement to work full time, 30, which means 30 hours a week, year round. Where does that come in? And that's generally, and I think Executive Director Moulton's not necessarily a member of the public when we're talking about housing definitions because he's the housing authority director. But where that applies when we have deed restrictions, or on the child care side of things, when we're talking about who's eligible for certain assistance with tuition and things like that. But all that is to say, I think that it behooves this group as part of this agenda, and maybe not right now, but to define what we mean by workforce, or decide that we're okay with it being appropriately vague in the code.
Well,
So is that would you call that an action item for this body, or would it be something for the future parking lot?
Well, I mean, the agenda item is the definitions of workforce,
Right.
affordable, and attainable housing, and I'm not sure what the objective is specifically for this meeting, if we're defining it or we're putting it back on
Well,
staff to
we only
come
got,
up with definitions.
25 minutes, but an action item, I think, if I'm hearing you correctly, Jason, would be getting greater definition of what it means to be in the workforce.
Yeah,
Well, I think
all three.
a good place to start is,
try to start like 5 times. Go ahead.
does anybody think that the workforce definition currently is adequate?
No.
No.
All right, so there's a place to start. That one needs to be worked on. So that's the first fundamental
The
question.
definition of workforce needs to be clarified
Yeah.
and improved.
It's not working the way it is now.
Good.
And then for our strategic discussion last week, is there an affordable workforce?
And just, I'm going to bring this up because it might be in the parking lot, but it actually talks about David's a little bit. And it was a definition of workforce. I can tell you the history, and Frank can too. When we did the double density, it really truly was the thought process and the discussion was around. I know I did, kind of felt attainable and affordable was the same, and it is not. But at the time, it may have been closer because inflation's gotten and building costs have gotten so ridiculous. But it was thought that it would be affordable, but not for the hourly worker. It was affordable for teachers. This is just the thought process behind it. Teachers, firemen, nurses. Yeah, not the CEOs of companies. Attainable. So we were thinking attainable meant affordable for that middle class, and that's what the definition came up across was with the workforce attainable was that it was 30 hours a week, whatever, the W-4 in this area, and it was for attainable, which we considered affordable for the middle class. And that's the history of it. That is totally been abolished.
So now when we hear workforce, we think of that person.
Correct.
And doing housing for that person, but it's not anywhere close to.
Correct.
But
And we
that's
talked
not
about the
what
other
the
day was
definition
making
says.
affordable workforce,
And-
not necessarily affordable and not necessarily workforce, but affordable workforce. So
I want to just put in one comment on this, that if we add an affordable requirement to the workforce definition, it's going to have the impact, in my opinion, of reducing the development of workforce housing, because the more restrictions you put on it, the less likely a developer is going to want to comply with that restriction.
which may not be a bad thing.
And well, maybe not, but that is clearly going to be a consequence if we add affordable as a further limiting condition to workforce housing. I do think we need to address it because it's not. The problem is that we had to put an administrative gloss to put the 30-hour-a-week requirement because the code itself doesn't say that, but it is appropriate to put that sort of limitation on it. But I think we better think about the consequences of what our change would do to future development of workforce housing.
However, we should probably have an action item to define affordable.
So yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I don't think I have any problem with that. The question is linking it together with the workforce housing.
Right. But what was the spirit of the community? What does the community want? It doesn't matter what we want. Did the community think when they said, I'm in favor of workforce housing, that I'm going to be making $42 an hour and I'll be at 80%? I can't think of someone who is part of our workforce. Now, maybe a policeman, maybe a teacher, but that's not the whole community.
No, it's not the whole
And
community.
so when we talk about the middle class, it's not at the level of I don't know what a teacher starts at, but I know what a police officer starts at. And I can tell you 9 out of 50 firefighters get paid, but it's
I would
not.
say middle class is going to be 80 to 120%.
I understand that, but at 80% AMI, that's $42 an hour for someone who's working in our community, working 40. Is that realistic?
I don't
Is
think
that
so. No.
really defining our workforce? I don't think it is. So I think
It's
these
part of our
numbers.
workforce. It is.
Well, we have
It's
the-
not all of it.
I agree, and that's why we have the attainable.
Right.
Right. It's not the whole workforce. Of
Are
course.
we
Is it a
meeting-
segment of the needs incentive for the housing?
What does the community
Right,
want?
that's
What's the
what-
community want? What does the
So
community need?
I think the community was large. I don't know for sure, but I think they're largely thinking of the teachers, the policemen, the fire department,
How many
the town
people?
employees.
Those are trigger words.
and
let's
those
say.
are-
Let's
But those are kind of in the middle of the AMI category. The people that are maybe the servers or the people that are cleaning the hotels, they're definitely not at that level. They're at a much lower level. And that's part of our community too. So it needs to be addressed. But I just worry that we make it too constricted and make it difficult to address any segment of the workforce if you put an affordability limit on it, because I don't think developers.
So Mark, I can share with you, I did some salary.
Wait, hold on a second.
Yeah,
Mark,
I'm done.
back to Mark having the floor.
Yeah, one at a time.
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
My feeling is we need to represent the spirit of the community's needs, and that may not be defined by those firefighter, teacher, police. That is newsworthy, but that doesn't very well define our middle class, in my opinion. I think that we do have a community that said, let's pay the tax we don't have to pay to support affordable housing, and workforce is absolutely not affordable housing. And not putting those together does a disservice.
And
to
that's
our
why the
community.
6E money goes to the housing authority that is directed at low and moderate income people.
But
Not by this chart.
yeah, but and we talked about this before, and this is still defining it, is that if we just have not connected, then we have Section 8, affordable housing. I don't know if, okay, I'm sorry, Scott. Maybe not Section 8, affordable housing. And if that's the case, are we doing the needs of the community? Or are we inviting people to come here to live here for affordable housing and live in Estes Park? Or are we helping the community that's here working that don't have a place to live? And I would venture to get, and I don't have the date on this, but I would say that 80% of the people that work in Estes Park are not making $42 an hour. I think 80% of people probably making more like 20, 25.
Let me move over to David now.
So I did a quick salary analysis of median salaries in the area and then against the AMI definitions, and I'm glad to provide that table to all of you where it goes in the 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, 4 person. I did it based on your article that you submitted today or submitted to the paper. And because I wanted to get a feel for what the community and it's color coded by red if you're below 100% of AMI. And it's colored by yellow if you're between 100 and 150, and then if you're over 150. And you don't get anywhere close to the yellow and the green for the majority of the. And there's Safeway workers in there, there's school teachers in there, there's linemen, there's policemen, there's firefighters, and they're all based on local salaries. And in the definition that I put in there, you can see which ones are median to Colorado because some of the data wasn't available for locally, but most of the data is local data from actual Safeway, from other ones. So I think that will give everybody some clarity as to what the community looks like.
So there is an AMI schedule available for the Estes Valley, I understand. It's not just, now the problem is you have people that are in that AMI calculation who make a whole lot more money, who maybe are the people that are working remotely for the hedge fund manager in Boston, So it's really hard to compare AMI as the sole criteria
But
as a
Bill,
result.
Again, in terms of the definition of workforce housing, we use one standard, which is the Larimer County AMI schedule. So we shouldn't divert from some Estes Valley AMI. But salaries are unique to ours, and so you compare our local salaries to those AMI, and then you figure out where you fit in the attainable or workforce. I also did a Venn diagram because it's confusing to me for you guys. I don't know if it's confusing for you, but how workforce housing in the definition is and where attainable housing, they only merge at 150 or less, 150% or less of AMI. So when you talk about workforce, you see that there's a significant portion of the community out there that is making a lot more money, that's way out there, that could still apply for workforce housing just because they live within the R3 boundary. But that's not, to me, the intent of workforce housing, because in me, they're not, a lot of those people aren't working in this community. I'm one of them, right? I work in this community. I don't apply for workforce housing, but I work for a company in Huntsville, Alabama. So I'm saying there's a lot of examples of that, and there are people in the community that are taking advantage of our workforce.
Well, and I wouldn't favor treating that person as a workforce housing, because they are working for an employer that's not in the school
And
district.
that'll
You
be
may be
where we
working
get to the definition. I think one of the other commissioners had a comment, and then I want to get back to Susan.
Real quick comment. I think I heard earlier from our previous conversation that we went for about 17 years up to 2017 with no density bonuses being, and I think it would be important to figure out why. Because to get back to your point, if we add too many restrictions, we might shut out any ability to do that.
Yeah.
And I think the guy that might be able to answer
He
this
might be.
Well, one of the
not right now, but
just one more point is one more conversation about that I told Scott I want to have with him at another time was that, you know, the way we define things. So I'll use the latest one that we just all turned down for this property on St. Vrain, right? So 3,000 square foot homes, but built by a builder to make a profit, right? But if on that same property, he took those units and broke them up into 2,000 square foot or 1,500 square foot units, and we changed our code to allow him to put more of those units at smaller sizes onto that property, we could address our housing needs a lot differently than we do now, but we don't have definitions in the development code that incentivize builders to go that route.
To go smaller.
To go smaller.
Right. I think you're right
so,
about that.
So if you go smaller, you can get more density. So that's why I say we need to look at what we're trying to achieve and then revisit our definitions so that we can achieve those greater housing goals in the community. That's where I think the definition of workforce housing and how we move forward on the development code can potentially incentivize builders in the right way so they can make their margin, you know, and put their equity into those homes, but just shape them differently.
And that's good. Melissa finally got the incentivized word up there, which is good. I wanted to make sure that was up there. Susan, back to you.
So
since
we
have
have
limited
just 12 minutes left, and I think I'm reading that clock correctly. And I think it would be appropriate at this point. I think your discussion here fully illustrates how complex this question is. It's not so easy as saying, let's define these 3 words, right? So, key question for you all, and I think I'm very naive about all this stuff, but I think you can't just say this is what affordable housing means to us. There's also all sorts of possibilities for the kinds of deep restrictions according to the housing and the income levels and all of that, right? It's a very complex and I believe technical question and issue. So the big question for you all to consider is, do you want to start doing this work now? Or do you want to put yourselves in the capable hands of Director Carisha and the development code rewrite process and not exactly wait, but
Well, unlike the first topic or the first major topic that we considered on the rezoning criteria, I feel a little more tendency toward the long-term solution, because I think this might take us a while to get to, especially since we're adding to the workload relating to that first topic. Right.
I agree. I think this one doesn't have the pressing nature that the other one had. We're having to be faced with decisions. The other thing I suggested, maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. Maybe we should say, what do we want to incentivize?
Yes, sir.
That's
yes, sir.
what I was thinking.
And do it that direction, and then say, we want to incentivize housing for people who make, whatever it is, or, $20 an hour
Less.
to $50 an hour.
Less, right?
And then determine what do we need to do instead of coming up with something and then seeing how people fit into it. So maybe if we spend our time talking about what exactly do we want to incentivize in housing, and then talk about how we get
So we're gonna came off the parking lot and back to the action item.
Well, because it could be an action item for your next meeting.
Yes.
So, I think David already had made that recommendation as well, that you talk about what you want to create, and you're probably gonna end up with the same thing about needing public engagement, and knowing the sense of the community as well, right?
Yeah, and the development code rewrite will have that.
Right.
But it might be good to provide, understanding what we're, again, in the values discussion,
We
right?
should discuss it.
What are we trying to incentivize what's the value of the community to go forward, with the development code so we know where to focus. I just hate the term workforce housing, because unless we define it to truly be what do we, there ought to be a definition in the manual that says this is what we mean by workforce. Because right now
and
it's.
there's some way to saying that it's a workforce of people that are working in the valley, and this is not the way to write it, right? But for the advancement for the community, for this community, not elsewhere. So I get what you're saying about if you have a W-4 that's to your address here, but you're actually working for a company in Chicago, are you advancing this community any?
I think on the other end of the spectrum,
I know I'm part of the public group. That is not how any of this works. No one can reside in deed restricted workforce housing in Estes that doesn't work or is self-employed where their business is conducted in the school district.
That's what I thought it was. Thank you.
So I just wanted to correct that point. I'm sorry for stepping in.
Thank you, that's
And
fine.
we've needed to make that clear to various people who've asked a question, and Scott and I have worked on that, and I don't think it's an issue that's been spiraling.
Okay,
out.
and that's
There's a
I
lot
thought
of
it was the
perception
intent. So
problems.
That's good to know.
Okay, good.
But the other thing I wanted to mention, and I brought it up during this meeting, essentially, it's not just about policemen and nurses and those, but the segment that I think we've forgotten about that does serve this community is the seasonal housing too.
Yeah, the seasonal needs to.
And we really haven't done much to address that. It's a different type of housing, but those are the people who work in the restaurants, they did work at the park, worked at other places.
but it's closely related to our hourly workers that are year round.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Because I don't know about you, this whole community is small businesses. We want it to stay small businesses. If we don't, we can go move to another community that has all like national businesses. This is a community of small, family-owned businesses. They're always going to have hourly workers, and we have nowhere for those people to live.
And a big segment of those are seasonal hourly workers.
Correct, but the same type of thing.
But it's the same type of thing. It's a different type of housing, though, that we really, I don't think, have addressed very well.
No.
Good. Okay, so just to review, he's nodding, thank you very much. Just to review, because we're really coming to an end, and the energy here has been wonderful and productive today. I want to congratulate you all on that, and I hope you can take that into your next study session. Just to reiterate, you all decided you're going to have quarterly joint sessions, and additionally, you decided the next one would be within 60 days to work on to background with values, but then community values, but then really look at suggestions from the development department for the rezoning criteria. And these are just big picture, right? And then on this third one, you've decided that it would be important for it to really be part of the development code rewrite process, and that you have some issues you want to discuss in your ongoing joint sessions in order to help bring more definition to that. Is that a fair representation?
So there's really no action item in regard to number 3, correct? Because what I heard was that you kind of want to wait for the development code to be rewritten to it, and in the process of that, develop those criteria around here.
Around seasonal housing.
Around seasonal housing, around the definition of workforce, around how we incentivize incentivize.
I thought we wanted to try to have enough further discussion about what we want to incentivize.
Yeah, it's
Well,
up
that
there.
is, it's right here.
But it's on the parking lot too.
Well, because I thought this is something maybe they want to move to their next meeting.
Right.
So that's why I brought it back over here.
I think that would be good to have at the next meeting.
Well, we
I
talked about
agree.
reading to the development code rewrite. I don't think we can. You know, we have too much in 2 years. I mean, this is where I was confused. Is we said we don't have a definitive workforce. I think we do. That's why I was kind of looking at Scott. But yeah, we do have a definition of what it is. We may not totally agree with exactly what it is, but we do have a definition of what it is.
Well, this says to be clarified and improved.
Right, and that's good. But I think we have to dive into that and not wait 2 years.
How can the authors of the development code develop incentives if we've been told what we want to incentivize?
Exactly right.
And the
They
definition
need
of
some
work.
direction.
Right.
And it's okay for this group to continue to work toward those action items. We don't need to wait 2 years and then do it halfway
Okay.
through.
So these would
And
be
we
things
want
you
this
would
to
do
be
next
part of the
meeting.
advisement of the development code,
Great.
in addition to community input. But town attorney.
No, that's right. I didn't think we had clarity there, so I was going to bring that up.
Okay.
I would suggest that we invite the housing authority to attend the next
table.
joint session, so that Scott
So you
doesn't
stop jumping over the chair.
So lose his mind.
just for Scott's help, if nothing else.
Oh, sweaty back there.
That was good.
I do want to remark for the
Throwing
record
airplane notes to us otherwise.
that we had an extensive conversation about workforce housing when it was initially defined with the density bonus back in 2016 or whenever that was. And there was an intentional decision at that time to not include income limits. And I think that is worthy of additional conversation because the bully in the room that we're not talking about is the market. And if a developer can't sell their units at a certain price because the market in Estes Park will not support them, they can either sit on those units vacant or they can lower the price to attract people who can meet those income requirements or the workforce requirements within the Estes Valley. So there is a governor on workforce housing that we shouldn't lose sight of, that if someone is making $22 an hour, they're not going to be able to make a $3,000 a month rent payment. Now they may stretch it further than we would like them to, so I think or like them to have to. So I think there's a legitimate conversation to be had about what percentage of someone's income is really reasonable for workforce housing or affordable housing or attainable housing. But I do want to make that note that we did envision the market serving as a governor on the upper end of those, whether it was a mortgage or whether it was a rent payment.
Yeah, but you can have a development code that overly, by its definitions, constrain the market in a way to what builders can build on available land. That even though you're trying to achieve these other workforce try to target it, that you can't build the size of units that become economically affordable.
Okay.
And so that's where I'm saying is that it's a balance between the development code.
And we have had projects that have been successful in that area.
Okay, this is still the discussion, right?
I also want to note that we started about 15 minutes late because the planning commission ran long, so we can take extra time if we
Thank
do.
you. And
1 minute.
15 minutes early. Okay.
so one more comment based on our experience in this process. I'm delighted to serve you in this way, and I know Melissa is as well. I would suggest that as part of your process, you decide what protocol you want and what logistics you want for these meetings. And then including, is it helpful to have another facilitator? Do you want to facilitate it yourselves? And that may vary depending on the topic of the meeting or whatever, but I would suggest you might want to just briefly consider that so that if someone else comes to facilitate in the future, it's just becomes your culture of your joint study session. So that's my suggestion, is to determine the protocol and logistics for study sessions.
So I just have a clarifying question. So the action items I have are, the definition of workforce needs to be clarified and improved, right? And what do we want to incentivize? And what about seasonal housing needs? So my question is someone going to have responsibility for bringing information about these kinds of things, or are you just going to get together and chat about it? seems like you're gonna want some data around some of these things.
We
have a
certainly
good
could use some
conversation.
data on
That's what we're bringing
seasonal
to the
housing,
table.
that's for sure.
I'm sorry, what, Bill?
We need some data on seasonal housing, because I didn't think the housing study did a great job in separating that out. And we may need more data on the demographics of the workforce. Those are the two things that, because that's come up
Absolutely.
specifically is,
We're not building to match the demographics.
right.
And the housing inventory, and
Yes.
I mean, we need to capture
Then
what's
that's a good
really
point.
happening,
Data needed.
what's available.
So if I
Seasonal
could,
housing
I
and-
could make a suggestion for you, that many, top teams, C-suite teams, decide what their agenda items are in advance and then assign them to one of the members or to a staff member, but typically to one of the members of the C-suite to bring some research into the meeting. And that may be a more effective way for your future meetings. It's just a suggestion, you don't have to follow it. So,
I think we've got some expertise on staff.
Yeah, I think staff is better equipped.
It would take me 10 times as long to research housing stuff as Scott could probably do in half an hour.
and they need to know ahead of time, what's the agenda item and specifically what information you need, otherwise it won't be targeted enough.
But I
to be
think we
helpful
could
for you.
collectively, in some regards, take on some of that burden so staff doesn't get it all. I mean,
Right.
I would rather see us put it together and lean on staff where we need input. But I personally wouldn't mind taking an action item and say, go do the research. I mean, I did that before this meeting to go put as much as I could together just to get my own head wrapped around the topic. But then we can lean on Scott and lean on staff and other things and ask questions where appropriate. And then they can correct us in this meeting too if we're a little off, if we're off base or whatever. But I think we need the staff for the heavy lifting, and then some of this other stuff that we're just doing outside studies to get familiar, like the demographic study, some of that stuff. I wouldn't mind doing some of that stuff in support of the group.
I just like having a facilitator,
Done.
because then everybody can participate. Not the mayor's not trying to facilitate and run the meeting at the same time he's participating.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about it, Gary, but it is helpful. Certainly to have a note taker.
Yeah, we
Sort of.
could have improved our protocol a little bit and, recognize each speaker or something to keep it a little more. But overall though, I thought we did pretty well. There was a little bit of overlap.
Sometimes overlap's not bad. I mean, everybody's into this speak, and sometimes it's nice to have a conversation.
Yeah, we had several examples of back and forth, which were productive.
I would completely agree, Mark, with what you're saying about getting more information about availability of units in the marketplace. And I think that should be something that we get periodically, whether it's every 6 months or however. But I think it's important for all of us to have a real good understanding of what's available, to be able to either rent or purchase, in the marketplace, and how that matches up with the
And I think
demographics. So
Scott
we also
has
have to
that.
have in there too.
Scott has a lot of that.
I
Yes,
wonder
I
if
know
the
he
chamber
does,
could
yeah.
help with any of the information on workforce thing.
So the facilitator in me is going a little cuckoo because I don't know who's doing this. And somebody needs to accept responsibility so the action item actually gets taken care of.
I thought what we said is that we're going to agree to an agenda item in advance and then assign the agenda item to somebody in advance of the meeting.
These are
That's
the
for
agenda
meeting
items.
agenda items. What she's talking about is, how are you gonna, it's really nice to have this wish list of demographics and, with income and housing availability. How are you gonna get that?
I can provide those.
Cindy's not here.
Yeah.
Let's assign it to her.
That's why I wanted him to join the conversation.
Yeah, I think we're okay with whatever you can
You taking
provide
notes
of
here,
those
Scott?
components of making that assignment. I almost brought you down to the chair here a few minutes ago. So if the group is amenable to it, I'd offer it to Mr. Moulton to develop information around those action items.
I'd like to have them at the table.
I would too.
Yeah.
As a staff, as a resource.
Yeah, then we can vote him off the island if we want.
Yeah, we don't like what he says.
You won't have to climb over the chair.
I feel better now, thank you.
You might lose hair.
At this point, thanks all for all of the input in this first joint joint study of the Planning Commission and the board of the town of Estes Park is adjourned. I remember.
Thank you all for being here.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, these will stay on until that on the air is off.